The AFC North featured two of the league's most high-powered offenses in 2024. But can we really expect the Ravens and Bengals to deliver the same kind of numbers that they did last year? And what about the Browns and Steelers? Both teams brought in lots of new faces, but are any of them really going to matter for fantasy? I know there's at least one guy that I'm going to like way more than Jared does. You can find out who that is, where the sleepers live, and which landmines to avoid in your draft when an all-new Draft Sharks podcast starts right now. Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here with the fourth installment of our divisional preview series. It is the AFC North up today with plenty of fantasy intrigue. Jared, we're going to start with a Ravens offense that might have been at its best form ever last season, don't you think?
Yeah, I think this was arguably the best offense in the NFL last year. They ranked third in points scored. They were first in yards. They were also first in yards per play at 6.8. The next best team was at 6.2. It's just a massive gap between Baltimore and everyone else when it came to per play efficiency. And that was really a step forward for Baltimore from their first season under OC Todd Monken. That first season, 2023, the Ravens were fourth in points, sixth in yards, third in yards per play. I think Todd Monken has helped this offense reach another level. Derrick Henry's obviously helped as well, but I think Monken deserves a lot of credit for that. This was a run-heavy Ravens offense. They were 31st in pass rate, 27th in neutral pass rate. They finished top 6 in the NFL in rush attempts, rush yards, and rush touchdowns. They were 31st in pass attempts, but they were 7th in pass yards and 2nd in pass touchdowns, just to give you an idea of how efficient this passing game was. And just, looking at the pass rates, pretty similar from between 2023 and 2024. They were 49.7% pass in Monken's first season, dipped a bit to 47.5% this past season. So, pretty easy offense to project. We know it's going to be one of the run heaviest offenses in the NFL.
Yeah, obviously we'll talk more about some of those factors in a few minutes. What's new on this team is not a whole lot. We got some significant additions on defense for Baltimore, but not much change on the offensive side. The coaching staff is intact. You were just talking about those guys. Cooper Rush is in as Lamar Jackson's backup. That might even be the biggest addition to the offense because when Lamar Jackson's gone down, they've most often had Tyler Huntley. Recently, clearly the Ravens have decided that Cooper Rush is an upgrade. Let's hope that we don't have to find out. DeAndre Hopkins is the biggest name coming in, but he didn't do a whole lot for the Chiefs last year after they acquired him from the Titans. So I don't see much reason for us to expect anything big from DeAndre Hopkins this year. A modest one-year deal for him on a team that's already run heavy, behind other wide receivers who are younger and productive and starting to get paid. I don't think that we're going to see a whole lot different on this offense from what we saw last year.
Nope, and why would the Ravens change much? This was an excellent offense last year. All 5 starting offensive linemen are back from last year as well, which is always nice.
Yeah, player targets gets a little bit easier when we have so much familiarity. It starts for me, Jared, with Zay Flowers at wide receiver 31 in ADP. He's not a screaming value or anything, but he is somebody that I like to draft where he's going. Wide receiver 35.5 PPR points per game last year, wide receiver 36 the previous season in that same format, up slightly in expected half PPR points per game last year, but his expected has been below his actual production each of the past 2 years. That's that run-heavy offense. He doesn't do great on targets versus other guys in similar setups, but Zay Flowers quietly got better usage last year in spite of the run-heavy offense. 14th among wide receivers in target share last season, 19th in first read target share, just 32nd in air yard share, 22nd in targets per route among wide receivers who ran at least 100 routes. But if we look at the year before, he was 19th in target share, so he's up in that category. He was 23rd in first read target share, so it looks like last year's Ravens tried to get Zay Flowers the ball more than they did the previous year. As a rookie, he was 52nd in air yard share, 48th in targets per route, so big jumps in those two categories. That sure seems to signal Baltimore getting him the ball further downfield. It was a lot of shorter stuff in his rookie season, so that seems to be improving, and we love to see a wide receiver who can handle it move further down the field with his targets because that's going to give us better scoring efficiency on a per target, per catch basis. What I like about Zay Flowers, I already mentioned where he's going. It's low in wide receiver 3 range, so I don't think you're really given a whole lot. But there are several ways that Zay Flowers can make sense for what you're doing, what you're trying to do in a given draft. Obviously, he makes for a nice stack with Lamar Jackson. Zay Flowers is going about 2 rounds behind Jackson in ADP, so it's very easy to take Lamar and then take Zay Flowers at some point over the next 2 rounds to pair with him. Even if you don't have Lamar Jackson, though, I think Zay Flowers looks solid as a wide receiver, too, if you did not start wide receiver heavy in a best ball draft. You get to the point where you just have one, there are a bunch of them off the board, and you could take Zay Flowers as a solid wide receiver, 2, and see what happens from there. Very nice wide receiver 3 or 4, I think, if you do start your draft wide receiver heavy, because there are some questions that Baltimore can answer for us. Like, what if there is more passing volume in Baltimore this year? We're not expecting a boom on that front, but last year's pass rate was the second lowest pass rate in the league and lower than any of their previous 3 seasons. So I think there will probably be some slight increase, at least, in pass rate. And then if like Derrick Henry gets hurt or something, the team loses a couple more games, we could see a few more percentage points on that pass rate, which would obviously help volume for everybody. And then what if Zay Flowers just scores more touchdowns? I don't think he's going to become this touchdown maven because he is a smallish guy on this team that does spread targets around somewhat, even though he's the number 1 wide receiver. But Zay Flowers has scored at just under a 6% touchdown rate through his first 2 seasons. And that's with Lamar Jackson, who we talk about the run-heavy offense, but Lamar Jackson is the most efficient touchdown thrower in the entire NFL. He is the NFL's active leader in passing touchdown rate. He's ahead of Aaron Jones. He's ahead of Aaron Rodgers. He's ahead of Patrick Mahomes. He has seasons of 36 and 41 touchdown passes. So Zay Flowers could just luck into a couple more touchdowns with that volume that's already been good within the framework of what the Ravens have going on. And then there's just kind of the general aspect of where Zay Flowers is in his career. It's his 3rd season. He turns 25 on September 11th, so right at the beginning of this season. Historically, that is the beginning of the window where wide receivers across archetypes start to reach their peak fantasy production. That's according to our aging curve data, the research that we put in across 20 years of NFL data, and that we apply to our dynasty rankings to help us project how these players are going to age. That says Zay Flowers' production is still heading upward. We're still learning exactly which bucket Zay Flowers belongs in. We know that he was a 1st-round pick. We know he's been good over his first 2 years. The better that he proves to be as an NFL player, as a fantasy producer, the less likely it is that he's close to his scoring peak yet. So he's probably about to score better than what we've seen. I don't need to figure out exactly how that scoring peak happens. I like what's going on around him. I like what we've gotten from the player so far. And the price is not outlandish. So I want to be there if there is this breakout season for him.
And I did not expect a 5-minute soliloquy on Zay Flowers to open up this podcast. I'm not going to argue with much you said, honestly. I think this is an awesome player. Like you said, Matt, almost everything was up from his rookie season to 2024, including yards per route run up from 1.64 to 2.25. That last year's mark was 16th best among 84 qualifying wide receivers. And I do agree, he should still be getting better. Put him on a lot of other offenses, and I think we're talking about a top 20 fantasy wide receiver. I will say with the touchdown thing, he has 9 touchdowns on that 6% touchdown rate that you mentioned, Matt, over his first 2 seasons. He also has 9.1 expected touchdowns. So he's basically scored at the level you'd expect based on his usage. For starters, Derrick Henry is this team's red zone weapon. And I think when they are throwing, it's probably more the tight ends than it is for Zay Flowers. So now he could still, in any given season, spike for a 10% touchdown rate, especially in this offense with Lamar Jackson. But it looks like, based on his usage so far, he's going to be a lower touchdown rate guy than you might expect based on his talent. All that said, at the wide receiver 31 price tag, I'm in. I mean, we have him wide receiver 28. In our PPR, in our half PPR rankings, he climbs to wide receiver 27 in PPR. I do think he's a better pick in PPR because of the lack of touchdown upside, at least how I see it. But even in half PPR at his current price, he's a target for me.
Yeah, and I agree that I'm not expecting him to turn into this big touchdown scorer, but I like the spot that he's in for better touchdown luck at some point in his career. So since I took that much time on Zay Flowers, who are you targeting among these Ravens?
Yeah, I like Mark Andrews. We have him tight end 5 in half PPR. He's tight end 7 in ADP, but he's tight end 7 in ADP going in the 9th round. There's quite a drop off. You know, there's the big 2, then George Kittle, then it's like Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkins, and then it's a pretty big drop to Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce. I like Andrews as a 9th round pick. He got off to a slow start last year. Remember, he had that car crash in mid-August, and he pretty much missed the rest of training camp. He was ready for week 1, but he got off to a slow start. From week 6 on last year, he was tight end 6 in half PPR points per game, had a 17% target share over that span. I do think he's in for some negative touchdown regression. Andrews last year led all tight ends with 11 receiving touchdowns. He was tied for fifth at the position in expected receiving scores at 6.5. So he vastly outproduced his expected touchdowns. Kind of like we were talking about with Flowers. Andrews is a good player still. Fourth in PFF grade, eighth in yards per route run among 43 qualifying tight ends last year. He's still good. No signs of decline from him. And he's in this high-scoring, efficient offense. I think Andrews has at least another year of top 5, top 6 level fantasy production in him.
Yeah, in the same way that I don't expect Zay Flowers is going to become a touchdown maven, I think Mark Andrews, as long as he's healthy and playing with Lamar Jackson, is going to be an above-average touchdown scorer. He's part of the reason that Zay Flowers is not going to get more chances because Mark Andrews is proven and looks good in the red zone. My one concern, he's getting a little bit older. He did fall off a bit on expected points. He did have that season split that you just mentioned where I hope that it was kind of recovering from the car crash. There's some room that he loses some to Isaiah Likely this year, but I'm not overly worried about it, and we'll talk about the comparison to Likely in a minute. The other Raven that I'm targeting is not one that I ever would have guessed, but it's Justice Hill at his RB61 price tag. So Derrick Henry is rare, just a rare human being. Running backs in general are likely to face injury issues at some point. So just luck is going to make you hurt if you carry the ball as many times as Derrick Henry does. But Derrick Henry's specific history tells us that he does not operate like humans. Like any other running back who has his workload history would have broken down multiple times at this point. Derrick Henry had the one season where he broke a foot, and otherwise he refuses to leave the field. So I'm not expecting any kind of injury regression to the mean on Derrick Henry because he has his own mean. That said, bad luck happens. That broken foot happened. If something like that happens, then I think Justice Hill, not a direct handcuff, obviously, because he's about the size of one of Derrick Henry's quads, but he would be the lead back if Derrick Henry went down. And more importantly, for best ball purposes at least, Justice Hill showed us last year that he's not a zero even when Derrick Henry is healthy. He matched Jalen Warren in half PPR points per game last year, and Justice Hill gave us 3 top 12 weeks in full PPR despite having Derrick Henry healthy and in the lineup. So not a zero for best ball. Big handcuff upside, and that handcuff upside is what will also make me interested in putting Hill on a lineup setting roster, though a bit less so for sure than in best ball.
Yeah, I think Hill's a great pick at ADP. Great combination of, like you said, Matt, some standalone value, some handcuff value. I mean, when the Ravens were playing from behind last year, which was not very often, but when they were in passing mode in the 2-minute drill or whatever, Justice Hill is on the field. Derrick Henry's not playing those snaps. So Hill played more last year than a lot of people realize. So I do think he has standalone value. And if you get a season where the Ravens take a step back, they lose 5 or 6 games, that's going to really boost Hill's playing time and fantasy production.
Any more guys that you're targeting on this team?
No, not really. We do have Lamar Jackson as our quarterback 1. He's quarterback 2 in ADP. We will take my fair share of Lamar Jackson. He leads all quarterbacks in fantasy points per game over the last 2 seasons since Todd Monken arrived. Probably has some touchdown regression coming as well. He had that 8.6% touchdown rate last year, the 11th highest ever. He was second in the league with 41 pass touchdowns. That's probably coming down a bit, but still expect this to be an efficient passing game. Most importantly, Lamar Jackson remains an elite runner. He led all quarterbacks with 915 rushing yards last year. Also led all quarterbacks in yards on designed runs, which makes that rushing production more bankable. If you made me bet on which quarterback's going to lead the position in fantasy points, Jackson would be my pick.
And like I said earlier, he is the NFL's active leader in passing touchdown rate, 6.4% for his career. So he's likely to be well above league average in that touchdown rate, especially with all the guys we've talked about. Derrick Henry, similarly, I don't think he can be a target for you at RB6, but it's fine. I'm done betting against Derrick Henry in the early rounds of drafts. At some point, he's probably going to decline, but we can't apply normal NFL running back aging curves to Derrick Henry because he's just abnormal. He's proved that year after year. So not a specific target, but certainly not somebody I'm avoiding. On the fade side, I'm fading Rashad Bateman, and I'll qualify it a bit because he's wide receiver 56 in ADP. So nobody at that level, basically nobody, is a bad pick. But I think that Rashad Bateman is somebody who's not going to make any impact this year. And especially as we get to lineup setting, he's not the kind of player that you should be targeting, even in that range. Tied for 67th among wide receivers in expected half PPR points per game last year. Tied for 13th highest points per game over expected. So he was scoring well above what was expected for his usage. That's why he finished wide receiver 34 in total half PPR points, wide receiver 47 in points per game, tied for just 56th in targets, 65th among wide receivers in target share, and 94th at the position in targets per route. That, I think, is particularly worrisome, not just for the coming season, but for his longer-term outlook, his dynasty outlook. That was his 4th season with the Ravens, and he's getting less usage than he was the year before. So they just gave him a contract extension. They like him, I'm sure, but they're also telling us that Rashad Bateman's just a guy that's part of the offense. He's not a featured guy. He's not somebody that they want to make sure to get the ball to. He's a receiver that they like. He factors in. He's worth having around for them, but he also has never reached 50 receptions in a season. So I'm not only not drafting Rashad Bateman this year, I would really try to sell him in Dynasty if you can at all manage to do so.
I agree. He just ran really hot last year on some of that deep ball stuff. Definitely ran hot on touchdowns, 9 scores on 45 catches, just an absurd touchdown rate. Just 4.5 targets per game, 16% target share. I don't think DeAndre Hopkins will impact Rashad Bateman's role this season, but he could. I think especially in the red zone, I think that's maybe where the Ravens might see Hopkins as an asset. So maybe Bateman comes off the field a bit when Baltimore's close to the goal line. He has a best ball profile though, right? I mean, 16.8 yards per catch last year on a 13.6 yard average target. So I do think he's fine in best ball. Like, I'm with you, Matt. He's not a target for me. If I have Lamar Jackson though, I might bump him up my rankings a little bit and make him more of a priority. But once we get to lineup setting leagues, Bateman is not someone I'm going to be interested in.
Isaiah Likely is another guy that I'm fading. And I don't know, every year I wonder if I'm going to be wrong and this is going to be the year that something propels him. I wondered at the beginning of last year if that was the case because he came out and gave us the #1 tight end fantasy score for week 1. And then everybody who grabbed him off of waivers got wildly disappointed the rest of the way because he gave us one more top 5 a few weeks later. And then not a whole lot else beyond that. Tied for 24th among tight ends and expected half PPR points per game last year. Mark Andrews was down from 5th the year before and expected to 16th last year. But even with that, Isaiah Likely was still only used as a low-level tight end 2. I can't get behind the cost, the tight end 15. I can understand the case for drafting Isaiah Likely. He's a Mark Andrews injury away from being the #1 tight end in this offense and giving us big upside. And sure, that makes him stash worthy. I just think that he's overpriced for that possibility. And I think as long as Mark Andrews is healthy, Isaiah Likely is not going to be somebody that I want to start.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Likely last year it was 19th in half PPR points per game, 24th in expected. If we look from week 6 on when Mark Andrews got healthy and got back to his normal role, Likely was 31st among tight ends in both actual half PPR points per game and expected half PPR points per game. As good of a player as I think he is, and most people think he is, Mark Andrews beat Likely last year in yards per route run, in PFF receiving grade, and in ESPN receiver score. Maybe you could say these guys are heading in opposite directions, Likely still ascending and Andrews is kind of on the decline. But last year, Andrews was still Baltimore's best tight end by multiple efficiency metrics.
Yeah, and Baltimore could have tried to move on from Mark Andrews this offseason, and they didn't. They can talk up Isaiah Likely all they want, but there are only so many targets to go around, and it's tough to see Likely getting enough to be fantasy viable as long as Mark Andrews is healthy. DeAndre Hopkins, Keaton Mitchell, they're both going at levels where they don't really matter. DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver 77 in ADP, Keaton Mitchell, RB 67. I don't think there's a whole lot of upside to either player. I'm not really interested in either one of them, even for best ball. And then I'm especially not interested once we get to lineup setting because even if injuries happen in front of them, neither of these guys is somebody that's going to turn into a player we start regularly.
Yeah, I have more interest in Mitchell than Hopkins. Hopkins is basically off my list. There's been some positive buzz on Mitchell this offseason. He obviously didn't do much last year coming off his injury. But if Derrick Henry went down, that Justice Hill would be the guy you'd want to play in fantasy lineups most. But I do think Mitchell would be involved. Maybe someone who gets, 10 or so touches per game. And at least in best ball, he could be helpful.
He can help in best ball, but he has a chance to be fool's gold in lineup setting because I think he's going to be a more valuable player to the Ravens than to fantasy folks. He's going to be a guy who pops up for these explosive touches, a few explosive touches each game, but never a sustainable amount that you can trust in your lineup, I don't think.
Yeah, agreed.
Cincinnati Bengals up next. What did they look like in 2024?
Good offense, obviously. Finished 6th in points, 9th in yards, 8th in yards per play, and one of the pass-heaviest offenses in the NFL last year. 2nd in pass rate, 1st in both neutral pass rate and pass rate over expected. They were also 2nd in red zone pass rate. So any area of the field, this was a very pass heavy offense. And the Bengals have only got more pass heavy under Zach Taylor. You look at their pass rates over the last 3 years now, starting in 2022, 62.1%. Up to 63.5%, and then up to 64.8% last year. So they're smartly leaning into the strength of this offense.
And they've signaled to us that it's not going away and might even continue to trend up a little bit because that's where they're spending their money. They paid Ja'Marr Chase, they paid Tee Higgins, they already paid Joe Burrow, they even paid Mike Gesicki this offseason. So expect lots more passing to continue in Cincinnati and expect things to look very similar to what they looked like last year because just like in Baltimore, Cincinnati did not change a whole lot for fantasy purposes. They replaced their defensive coordinator. There are some new guys on defense, but there's not a whole lot else that's different, especially on offense. The Bengals waited until round 6 to draft a running back. I know I expected them to add something more significant than Taj Brooks. We'll see what he looks like as we move through the summer. They brought back Samaje Perine, I assume because they were scared he was going to lose Medicare. They let guard Alex Kappa walk, which probably doesn't matter because this year's expected starters at guard both played more than 60% of the snaps last year. So expect this year's Bengals to look a lot like last year's.
Unfortunately, they didn't add anything significant to the offensive line. They're expected to have the same 5 starting offensive linemen on a unit that last year was 29th or worst in PFF run and pass block grades and ESPN run and pass block win rate. So basically, any metric had this is like a bottom 5 offensive line. They do have some young players. Maybe they take a step forward, but if there's a concern with Cincinnati's offense, it remains the O-line.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the way that they score their fantasy points, it shouldn't matter a whole lot for our purposes. Player targets, Jared, this is a condensed offense. I think it's fairly priced in drafts. And for that reason, I don't have a whole lot in the way of specific targets here.
My most heavily targeted Bengal is Tee Higgins.
Shocker.
You might be surprised by that. He's been a guy I've been on since he's been in the NFL. And honestly, it's worked more often than not. People hate Tee Higgins because he's hurt a lot, which I get. It can be annoying. But we're getting an injury discount when you look at his per game production. I mean, Higgins is wide receiver 14 in ADP right now. We have him wide receiver 11. Last year, he was 3rd in half PPR points per game among wide receivers, 5th in expected points per game, even as the clear number 2 in this offense. He's still a guy who's going to get, 22, 23, 24% of the targets in a high volume, efficient passing game. I see no reason to be off Higgins, even with the injury risk.
You guys probably don't know this, but Jared actually has a Tee Higgins jersey tattooed underneath his shirt. That's how into Tee Higgins he is. But like you said, it's been working out. What you have to do is deal with the injury stuff, which seems to pop up every year, but it also gets a little bit overblown. He missed a bunch of games last year, but he also gave us wide receiver 1 level numbers, and the injuries are going to make people draft him later. He's going to the 2-3 turn in best ball drafts, which is just fine value for Tee Higgins. And I think that's going to push even further as we get 2 lineup setting leagues and drafters aren't quite so wide receiver hungry. Certainly anywhere in round 3, I think is fine for Tee Higgins. If he makes it into round 4, I think you've won there. Brace yourself because there's going to be a week where it's like, I thought Tee Higgins was going to play. No, he hurt a hamstring in pregame. If you can get through that week and deal with the rest of them, you're probably going to get a borderline wide receiver 1 for like 14 weeks of the season, which is the kind of production he gave us last year. Ja'Marr Chase is obviously the number 1 pick across formats. And I think if you're drafting a bunch of teams and some of those are from the number 1 spot, you should make sure that some of those have Ja'Marr Chase. He'll be hard pressed to do quite as well as he did last year, but there's no reason to believe he's going to crash for all the reasons that we've talked about with this offense.
Yeah, he's awesome. The situation is awesome. Ja'Marr Chase is the clear target leader here. The usage near the goal line for Ja'Marr Chase last year was insane. He led all wide receivers in red zone targets, end zone targets, and expected receiving touchdowns. It's almost got to the point, like when Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams were in their prime, they would just get to the 5-yard line and like Rodgers would just audible out of a run play and Adams would run some quick slant or the back shoulder thing. And the connection was just so good between them. It's kind of gotten that way with Burrow and Chase, where Burrow's just looking Chase's way when they get in scoring range.
Yeah. Joe Burrow, similarly, he's fairly priced. I've actually seen him often slide past ADP in drafts on drafters, and I'll take him even if I don't have Tee Higgins or Ja'Marr Chase on my roster already. If he's a few spots past ADP, I'm like, I'm not going to take Joe Burrow here. I have these other wide receivers that I'm looking to stack. But it gets to a certain point where I'm like, fine, I'll just take Joe Burrow. If he can score like the QB2 last year, I don't think he's fallen off far from that. So I'll take him here and I'll see if I can get some of the later Bengals to stack with him, especially Mike Gesicki at tight end 21, who's a best ball target for me, whether I have that Burrow situation or even if I don't have Joe Burrow. He's the one that I look at on the board and I'm like, do I need to take a tight end here? Nah, I can wait because Gesicki's still 4 tight ends away and people aren't pushing him up high enough.
Burrow's interesting in drafts because Chase always goes, not always, but he's always a top 3 pick. Higgins is usually around the 2-3 turn. So it's the teams at that 4-5 turn that are considering taking Burrow as a stack. But if they don't, you could see Burrow get into the 6th round, even middle to the late 6th round. He seems to have a wide range of outcomes of where he's going in terms of draft price. You're definitely starting to talk me into Mike Gesicki as a target. If you look at his splits last year, that with and without Tee Higgins thing was big, right? 5 games without Tee Higgins, Gesicki was the tight end 3 in half PPR points per game on tight end 2 usage. Now, in his first 10 games with Tee Higgins, he was tight end 45 in half PPR points per game, tight end 40 in expected. But those last 2 games with Tee Higgins, 10 catches, 86 yards on 12 targets, 8 catches, 68 yards on 10 targets. And then he gets that 3-year, $25.5 million extension from the Bengals offseason. So I wonder if they finally figured out late in the year that Mike Gesicki should be our clear number 3 option. And if that's the case, with all the passes they throw in Cincinnati, even as the clear number 3, Gesicki could be someone who gets enough volume to flirt with low-end tight end 1 production.
Folks, Jared is starting to recognize it, but I have been the most realistic on Mike Gesicki of anybody that you've ever heard throughout the guy's career. So if I'm up, then go with me. If I'm down, then go with me. I'm the Mike Gesicki whisperer. If we didn't have those 2 games at the end of the season, or if the Bengals just re-signed him for a little bit, then I'd be like, yeah, he didn't do that well when Tee Higgins was on the field. I'm not that interested. But we did have those 2 games to end the season. We did have a big contract. And not really big in NFL terms right now, but big for the Bengals because it ended this string of tiny 1-year contracts for tight ends, which included Mike Gesicki the year before. They just kept bringing in these nobodies on cheap deals, giving them some targets and then moving on when those guys got more money in free agency. So the fact that they followed last year by saying, now we want Mike Gesicki around. And that also, by the way, followed Joe Burrow working with him in practice and being like, this guy's really good. I wish I'd had him around longer. So I'm not sure that I actually like Mike Gesicki for a lineup setting team. I think that you could toss him on a roster as a tight end 2 and see what happens because there's room, especially if and when Tee Higgins goes down. But for best ball purposes, he absolutely should be higher than tight end 21.
Yeah, and honestly, at his price tag, even if he is just a Tee Higgins handcuff, like Higgins is probably going to, like I love Tee Higgins, he's probably going to miss a few games this year. So even if you get top 10 numbers out of your tight end for 3-4 games at a tight end 20 or 21 price tag, I think even that would make Gesicki a fine pick.
Chase Brown is the guy that I've had some self-conferences on this offseason. Like heading into the NFL draft, I was like, I can't take round 3 Chase Brown because the Bengals are definitely going to draft somebody. There's no way that they're just rolling with this backfield. But they did. Like I said, 6th round, Taj Brooks. We'll see. Maybe they just really like him and he's going to be a significant part of the picture. But waiting that long to draft a running back when all you brought in was Samaje Perine and you kept Zach Moss around, that to me says they really like what Chase Brown did. They want him to at least remain the clear leader of this backfield. Probably doesn't quite get as much work as he got at the end of last year when he was as heavily used as any running back in the league. But he can come down from that and still certainly pay off as a RB1 in this offense that's just got so many points available.
Yeah, there's 2 splits with Chase Brown I'm looking at from last year to try to figure out how much work he's going to get this year. The first is his final 5 games with Zach Moss. By that point, Chase Brown had taken over as the leader of this backfield. Moss was still involved. Chase Brown in those 5 games, 12.8 carries, 3 targets per game. He was the RB26 in expected half PPR points per game, RB22 in actual. And then, like you said, Matt, those final 8 games where Zach Moss was not in the picture, 18.9 carries per game, 5.5 targets per game, the RB1 in expected points per game, RB4 in actual points per game. I think his volume's going to be somewhere in between those 2 extremes. Figuring out where it's going to land is the question here. If it's closer to those final 5 games with Moss, then he's not a great pick at ADP. If it's closer to those 8 games without Moss, then he's a great pick at ADP. So that's going to be a big one to try to figure out as we get into August.
Even though there was no Zach Moss at that late season stretch, these Bengals did trade for Khalil Herbert. And then they were like, whatever, we got Khalil Herbert. Why would we bother with him? We can just keep giving the ball to Chase Brown every single time.
For sure. Now, I will say with Chase Brown, his rushing efficiency metrics were kind of middling. 47 RBs with 90-plus carries last year, 29th in PFF rushing grade, 20th in yards after contact per attempt, 20th in elusive rating, 21st in rush yards over expected per attempt. So he was just kind of average as far as rushing efficiency. That's what has me iffy on exactly how much work they're going to give him. But he was definitely an offseason winner with the lack of significant additions the Bengals made to the backfield.
Plus, I'm going to bet that Zach Taylor is looking at 0 of those categories.
Probably right.
Anybody else on this roster that you're even paying attention to this summer? I got to say, the one guy that now I'm curious to watch again is Jermaine Burton. I was all set to just forget that he existed, but then we got a little bit of buzz, and I'm like, okay, I remember Jermaine Burton. I'm going to wait and see what the rest of the summer says.
Yeah, interesting prospect Burton was, and he's more interesting because Andre Yoshivas was really bad last year. He was dead last among 84 qualifying receivers in PFF receiving grade, 83rd among those 84 in yards per route run. Basically, no efficiency or quality metric you can look at that said Yoshivas was good last year. So I do think that wide receiver 3 spot should be open for competition. And if Burton is focused, I think he can definitely win it.
And if you get in that situation where you see Joe Burrow sliding well past ADP and you don't have Tee Higgins or Jamar Chase, get Joe Burrow, get Mike Gesicki, and then add Jermaine Burton at the very end of your draft. And then let's all hope that we can have a party at some point. Jared, I know that you had a headache earlier today. Do you think that subconsciously at all it was caused by knowing you were going to have to talk about the Cleveland Browns?
Probably.
How did they look in 2024?
Yeah, we've talked about 2 of the better offenses in the NFL in Baltimore and Cincinnati. The Browns last year, dead last in points scored. They were 28th in yards. Of course, they had the 4 different quarterbacks. And really, among those 4, only Jameis Winston was even serviceable. The other 3 guys were horrible. What's interesting, though, is despite being such a bad offense, they were 1st in the NFL in pass rate. They were 4th in neutral pass rate, 10th in pass rate over expected. So, the passing game wasn't good, but Kevin Stefanski was still leaning into it. I don't know if that was smart or not, but I think that's interesting as we project this team into 2025. The other interesting thing, too, is they were 2nd in offensive pace and 3rd in plays. And the Browns have pretty consistently, especially these last 3 years under Kevin Stefanski, ranked highly in offensive plays. They were 6th, 1st, and 3rd in the last 3 seasons. Again, despite not being a great offense. One thing I think that is working in favor of these Browns is I do think they're going to be somewhere near the top of the league in total play volume.
I would venture to guess that Ken Dorsey was leaning into the pass more than Kevin Stefanski was, because Ken Dorsey is now out as offensive coordinator in Cleveland, just like he was in Buffalo not that long ago. Tommy Rees is in as the new OC in Cleveland. It's his first turn as an NFL offensive coordinator. He was the tight ends coach and pass game specialist last year. Before that, the OC and QB's coach for Alabama in 2023, served the same position at Notre Dame the previous 3 seasons. One other year on an NFL staff for Tommy Rees. That was back in 2016 as an offensive assistant in Mike McCoy's final Charger season. That's definitely a name I had forgotten until I was looking up this particular show. The quarterbacks have been completely renovated. And of course, the other part of that pass rate from last year was Jameis Winston. They just went pass happy once Winston was in there when no other quarterback was available. Traded for Kenny Pickett, signed Joe Flacco, drafted Dylan Gabriel, then drafted Shedeur Sanders. We'll talk about the quarterbacks again in a few minutes. They drafted Quinshon Judkins, 36th overall, early in round 2. Of course, the big question with him now is if he's going to be available or in prison by the time the season rolls around, because he was recently arrested on domestic violence charges. We'll see where that goes. Not a whole lot for us to say about that at this point. Dylan Sampson, another running back drafted in round 4, and the Browns added tight end Harold Fannin Jr. in round 3.
Lots of carries available in the Browns backfield because Nick Chubb and Dante Foreman are gone. Those guys combined for 173 carries last year, 44% of the team total. So definitely, that's a big question here. Who's going to get that work? And then I think the coaching change is interesting because you had Kevin Stefanski calling plays for his first 4 seasons in Cleveland. He called plays for the first 6 games last year. Then he turned things over to Ken Dorsey as play caller. So from week 8 on last year, it was Ken Dorsey calling plays. Stefanski's expected to take back play calling duties this season. Tommy Rees is going to be involved in the game planning, but it's going to be Stefanski calling plays again, which he did for his first 4 seasons with the Browns.
And he has been a run-friendly coach dating back to his time as Minnesota's OC before Cleveland hired him as the head coach. All of that should make this a great spot for Quinshon Judkins, the early second-round rookie. He's at RB30 in ADP, but we don't know what to make of the situation right now. It's early yet. We got to wait for further developments. He's not even signed right now. The latest report is Judkins is not reporting to training camp because he doesn't have a contract, and both he and the Browns are now focused on the legal matters. But if things progress in a way that puts Judkins on the field, he's got huge fantasy upside.
He does, and that RB30 ADP is already 5 or so spots lower than it was before the news of this incident took place. I would imagine it's going to drop even further. At some point, I think he's worth the risk because he was exciting just really because of opportunity in Cleveland for the most part. I didn't love Judkins as a prospect. He had the huge true freshman season at Ole Miss. Wasn't as good his second season at Ole Miss or at Ohio State last year. His advanced metrics, 3.04 yards after contact per attempt was 26th among 31 qualifying running backs. He was actually dead last among those 31 RBs in rush yards over expected per attempt. So I still have some questions about the player, but the opportunity is definitely good if he's available and playing for this team. So, in that case, at an RB30 price tag, that's, I think, where he starts to get potentially draftable. It's risky, but it could pay off.
Yeah, even before all of that happened, he was, I think, a value in drafts. And that's kind of the story with these Browns. They're all going so late that they're all target whoever you want. If you like some individual guy, go for it because he's going late enough that it makes sense. Quinshon Judkins was my number one target here. David Njoku was an early draft season target, has not been quite as much for me recently just because of where other players are going around. It just doesn't end up at the top of my queue, but he's still somebody that I like across draft formats. David Njoku's been a key reason that I haven't been quite as in on Mark Andrews as you have so far. Even though Mark Andrews is going at a fine value proposition, we can still look 3 spots later in positional ADP and David Njoku's on the board.
For sure. And Njoku has been my favorite tight end target throughout the entire offseason so far. He is climbing in price. I think he was like tight end 12 or so in ADP for most of the offseason. He's up to tight end 10 now. I'm still drafting him there. We have him ranked tight end 8. This guy, if you look at his 8 healthy games last year, which is a problem, he's dealt with injuries. I get that. But in his 8 healthy games last year, he was tight end 6 in half PPR points per game. 2023, he was also tight end 6 in points per game. 2022, he was tight end 9 in half PPR points per game. So he's been a perennial top 10 tight end. I get that there are questions with the offense this year. Browns offense hasn't been great any of those last 3 years. They haven't finished in the top half of the league in pass yards or pass touchdowns in any of those last 3 seasons. And really, if Joe Flacco under center, we saw Flacco put up big numbers with the Browns in 2023, and Njoku was a big part of that. Flacco 6 games with the Browns in 2023, and Njoku averaged 80.5 yards per game on 6.2 catches per game, 0.7 touchdowns per game. He was an elite fantasy producer. Small sample size. I'm not saying we're going to get that again, but to me, Joe Flacco would not necessarily be bad news for Njoku's fantasy outlook.
Yeah, Joe Flacco's similar to Jameis Winston in that he's not a good quarterback. Otherwise, he would have an established job year after year, but he's competent. He'll get the ball to the pass catchers, and David Njoku is a key one of those. And you mentioned the injury stuff. I care even less about that for Njoku than I do about it for Tee Higgins because it's going to be difficult to find a replacement for the weeks that Tee Higgins misses. Not going to be very difficult in most fantasy leagues to find an Njoku replacement if he goes down at any point.
Exactly.
Anybody else you like in particular among these Browns as draft targets?
I like their second and possibly third wide receivers. I like Cedric Tillman quite a bit. He's wide receiver 62 in ADP. Very small sample size, but we got 4 games last year with Tillman in a full-time role in this Cleveland offense. 10.0 targets per game on a 21.5% target share. Again, a lot of this is fueled by Jameis Winston and the high pass volume, but had a 21.5% target share. That's a nice number. He was wide receiver 4 in expected points per game over that span, wide receiver 9 in actual points per game. And everything out of Cleveland is that Tillman is locked into one of those starting outside wide receiver jobs. So at that price tag for a guy who I think might be pretty talented, he's definitely someone I'm taking a lot of. And then I got to admit, I take a lot of Deontay Johnson.
He's a why not price.
Maybe
really.
I'm crazy. He's wide receiver 100
right.
in underdog ADP. I mean, he goes undrafted most of the times where I don't take him. I know things went completely off the rails last year, but in his 6 healthy games with Carolina, he was still the Deontay Johnson that we all know and love. 9.2 targets per game on a 26.4% target share. He was wide receiver 4 in expected half PPR points per game over that span. He just turned 29 earlier this month. To me, age is not an issue. It's the attitude and whatever else is going on with him. But if he's focused, especially in this wide receiver room, Deontay Johnson, there's a world where he leads the Browns wide receivers in targets this season.
Yeah, you don't see guys at wide receiver 100 ADP who have the upside to lead a healthy wide receiver core. Is that likely? No, of course it's not, because he played his way off of multiple teams last year and then got a minimal contract in Cleveland, which hasn't been pumping him up since signing him. But it is still possible that he's just their best wide receiver when they get into the year. The guys ahead of him aren't well-established, totally proven. I like Jerry Jeudy as a player. He has question marks, so we don't know that he's really a number 1 wide receiver at this point, and he's had enough time to prove that he's that across a couple of teams. So that question at the top, the question of whether Cedric Tillman is going to be anywhere close to what he was for his best 4-game stretch last year, or if he's just going to be a guy that's part of the offense, all of that, it's a why not price for Deontay Johnson as your wide receiver 9 or 8 on this best ball roster. And same thing for lineup settings. Stick him on your bench. And if we're 3 weeks in and he's seen 6 total targets, then dump him. And if he's getting more playing time, then you might find this complete steal in a rare scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I like Johnson and Tillman more because I'm a little lower than market on Jerry Jeudy. Obviously had a nice season last year, but I do think it was a bit of a product of Jameis Winston. I think it was a product of Amari Cooper got traded a third of the way through the season. Cedric Tillman missed a lot of time after he had been coming on. David Njoku missed time throughout the season. If you kind of look at Jeudy in games with those guys, there were 9 games last year where Jeudy and Njoku were healthy. In those 9 games, Njoku had 89 targets to Jerry Jeudy's 67. Not even close. Njoku was this team's top target. And then there were those 4 games where you had Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, and David Njoku healthy. In those 4 games, Cedric Tillman, 40 targets, Njoku, 37, Jerry Jeudy, 36. So I'm just not convinced that Judy's going to be the clear top target in this passing game. I think last year just kind of a lot of things fell in place for him to have that nice season.
I think where we're at in his career, Jerry Jeudy's a fine wide receiver if you don't have anybody better. He certainly can lead your team. If he is your top receiver, it probably means your wide receiver core is not awesome. Now, I started out seeing him as a value. I still think he's a value at wide receiver 38. He's not really a target for me, though, because I don't think this is a spot where he's going to boom. He could be wide receiver 38 at draft time and finish the season as wide receiver 30. And that delivers you value, but it's probably not changing your season. Cedric Tillman, I've talked myself into more because I think I was a little bit too focused on Jerry Jeudy and then Deontay Johnson as the bookends instead of thinking, what if Jerry Jeudy is not that good? What if Deontay Johnson doesn't work out again? And what if Cedric Tillman's just the most talented guy in this group and pays off from this price tag that has basically no risk? So he's somebody that I've gotten more interested in as we've gone along. I think the running backs are interesting, especially now with the Quinshon Judkins situation. Dylan Sampson very quickly leaped ahead of Jerome Ford in ADP. I don't think that's fair to Jerome Ford. I get why you would do it because the coaching staff had Jerome Ford for the past couple of years and then drafted Quinshon Judkins and drafted Dylan Sampson. So that might mean they're like, all right, these two guys are both going to be better than Jerome Ford. But it also might mean that they got to Dylan Sampson on the board and they were like, well, we like this guy better than anybody else that's available. Jerome Ford's not going to be with us beyond his rookie contract. We could use some depth at running back. Let's go ahead and take this guy from Tennessee and see what he can become. Doesn't necessarily mean he's ahead of Jerome Ford this year. And Jerome Ford been pretty good over the past couple of years. So if he gets on the field and gets the ball, Jerome Ford could really give you serious value from an RB59 ADP.
Dylan Sampson went in the late 4th round as the 12th running back off the board. There were a lot of people who even had him as a top 5 back in this class. The NFL obviously was not that high on him. He had the big 2024 season at Tennessee, big raw production, nearly 1,500 rushing yards, 22 rushing touchdowns, 5.8 yards per carry. We've talked about these Tennessee guys in the past. It's a tough evaluation. It's such a funky spread college offense. You'll see Sampson running against defenses with 4 guys in the box. If you look at his advanced metrics, they were just okay. 14th in rush yards over expected per attempt among 31 running backs at the combine, 16th in yards after contact per attempt. He's not someone I was super high on. So I would take Jerome Ford straight up over Dylan Sampson. So definitely at the lower price tag, I'm in on Jerome Ford. Last year, Jerome Ford, 5th in yards after contact per attempt among 47 qualifying running backs, 6th in elusive rating, 5th in rush yards over expected per attempt. So he was an efficient runner last year, and we know he can contribute in the passing game. He's very capable in the passing game. So, if there's no Quinshon Judkins, I think both these guys will be involved. It's not going to be all Jerome Ford. He's just not built to be a feature back. But I think he's the guy who would give you more fantasy production, especially early in the season. I would assume if a Judkins suspension happens, it's going to be the first 4 or 6 weeks of the season or whatever. I think at that point, that's when Jerome Ford is going to still be clearly ahead of Dylan Sampson on the depth chart. So I think Ford's the guy you want to draft.
Yeah, I like getting Jerome Ford right now, especially in my best ball drafts. And Jared, before we finish up with the Browns, I know you've been sick this week. I'm not trying to make you feel worse, but Dylan Gabriel, sleeper for Superflex drafts. I say grab him at the end. I say treat the uncertainty about this quarterback situation as a positive rather than a reason to back away from it. The Browns didn't sign Joe Flacco because he's their answer at quarterback. They signed him because he's a reliable veteran who gives them a floor in case nothing else works out. They traded for Kenny Pickett because they're like, he's still young. Maybe he can be better than he was in Pittsburgh. Then they drafted Dylan Gabriel ahead of Shedeur Sanders, which means they like Dylan Gabriel better. And they started him with the first reps in the first offseason workouts. I'm not saying Dylan Gabriel's already their QB1, but as we get into training camp, if he operates immediately as the first guy up in drills, the first guy getting a shot, that's only another signal that they were like, we really like this guy. That's why we're taking him in round 3. He's not a lock from that level, and that's why he went in round 3. But we like the upside. We're going to take a shot, and then if he doesn't work out, we can try again next year.
Yeah, this whole quarterback room is in a void for me in best ball, at least as of now. If we start to get a better idea into August who's going to be on the field, I just think all 4 of these guys project to give you zeros more often than not on a weekly basis, and I don't want to deal with that in best ball. I'd be more willing to take any of them in lineup setting where that zero can just sit on my bench, and if they do take over, maybe they become a low-level option in Superflex, but staying away from the situation for now.
Oh, come with me, everybody. We'll take Dylan Gabriel, and then we'll laugh at Jared with our points come November. Pittsburgh Steelers to close out the AFC North. What did 2024 look like before they changed everything?
Yep, it was an Arthur Smith offense through and through last year. The Steelers were 29th in pass rate, neutral pass rate, and pass rate over expected. That's how Arthur Smith likes to run things. As a result, they were 4th in the NFL in rush attempts, just 29th in pass attempts. It was a middling offense. They ranked 23rd in total yards, 16th in points.
This team is just lying to itself every year about its mortality. It's like the old guy who's combing his hair over and using spray tan. It's like, Grandpa, we're well aware of how old you are. You're not competing with the group that you think you're competing with. They did make changes this year, but what's new is an old quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, dwarfs the importance of the other changes on this team, but he's 41. He's heading into his 21st season. He did play all 17 games last year and did so the year before the Achilles injury with the Jets. So he's still durable, still somebody that you can trust to be out there, but not Green Bay's Aaron Rodgers. And I don't see exactly what he's doing for this team that desperately needs to actually rebuild. Elsewhere, they traded for DK Metcalf, but then traded away George Pickens. I get that Pittsburgh's sick of George Pickens' attitude. And frankly, in the past, when Pittsburgh has given up on wide receivers that seemed like questionable decisions, it sure has worked out for them better than the teams those wide receivers have gone to. So can't fault them too much for giving up on George Pickens. DK Metcalf certainly looks like an upgrade over Pickens. They drafted Caleb Johnson in round 3. That, of course, followed the team choosing to let Najee Harris walk in free agency, and all he got was a modest 1-year deal with the Chargers, so it definitely was a decision to move on from Najee Harris. And then, because, of course, they had this gaping hole with Pat Freiermuth at tight end, they decided to trade for Jonnu Smith because Arthur Smith loves to run the ball and employ Jonnu Smith.
Exactly. I cannot wait to see how this plays out with Arthur Smith and Aaron Rodgers. We know what Arthur Smith wants to do. He wants to pound the ball. We know Aaron Rodgers wants to have control of his offense, and that usually means a pass-heavy offense. We saw that in New York last year. They were one of the pass-heaviest offenses in the NFL. So who's going to control this offense? Can these guys coexist in the same offense? I'm really excited to find out, and I'm not sure the answer is going to be great for the Steelers.
And by the way, these are 2 pig-headed guys. Sometimes you can get, 2 guys that want to do different things, but one of them's like, all right, that's fine. Let's see how this works. Arthur Smith was pissed off every time somebody asked him a question about why he didn't do something differently when he was Atlanta's head coach. And Aaron Rodgers, I'm not sure Aaron Rodgers has been happy, like off of ayahuasca since, 1998 or something.
Exactly. It's going to be fun if you're not a Steelers fan.
Yeah. So we'll ask Shane around midseason as a Steelers fan if it's fun for him yet. Who are you targeting among these Steelers?
Jalen Warren's my favorite target on Pittsburgh. We're only slightly ahead of ADP. We have him RB31. He's RB32 in ADP. I mean, for starters, I just like the player. Warren has been efficient throughout his career. He has a 4.8 career yards per carry. He was actually dragged down last year by a slow start, which I think was a result of a couple injuries. He had hamstring and knee injuries early last season. So he only averaged 3.1 yards per carry in his first 4 games, but that bumped back up to 4.5 over his final 11. He's also an efficient and capable pass catcher. The issue with Warren has always been he just hasn't got a ton of work. He has 8.8 and then 8.0 carries per game the last 2 years. I think that's still his floor. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out of this season with, 8 to 9 carries per game. But I do think there's upside for more this season if Caleb Johnson just doesn't fire out of the gate, right? Like he's a third round rookie. We don't know what's going to happen. If he's not ready, I think Jalen Warren's going to pick up some extra rushing work, and we know he's going to be involved in the passing game. 4.4 targets in 2023, 4.4 targets per game, 3.1 targets per game last year. But again, that was in this really run-heavy offense. I think there's room for the targets to rebound if the Steelers do throw more under Aaron Rodgers.
Our prospect guru, Shane, was big on Caleb Johnson before the draft, liked the prospect very much. And Caleb Johnson looks like a guy who could long-term for sure be a backfield leader in the NFL. Maybe he's ready to do so right away. Third round pick is kind of that borderline where you can tell yourself either look how much the Steelers liked him versus how many other running backs went after him, or you could be like, yeah, but they didn't take him until the third round. All I know for sure is that Jalen Warren's been pretty good when healthy. He took work away from Najee Harris early in his career as an undrafted free agent versus this first round pick who spent his first year, Najee Harris, being a dominant workhorse in Pittsburgh, getting all of the carries and all of the targets and everything. And then shortly thereafter, this undrafted free agent comes and takes stuff away. If we look at Caleb Johnson versus prospect version of Najee Harris, Caleb Johnson's not as good as Najee Harris was as a prospect. Now, maybe that doesn't matter at this point. That might be totally irrelevant, but I think it at least adds a possibility of Jalen Warren pulling more work for this season than what we saw the past 2 years. It's possible that the Steelers are like, yeah, we like Caleb Johnson. He's not quite as sturdy a horse as Najee Harris was, but we like the explosiveness. We like the upside, or we like that he's on a rookie contract instead of giving Najee Harris a second contract, whatever the case may be. They like him, obviously. We don't know how much. We'll learn on that. And that sheer uncertainty makes Jalen Warren a good buy, I think, at RB32. Otherwise, there's nobody that I'm really targeting. I think DK Metcalf could turn into a good value at wide receiver 23. He's not a player that right now I'm like, oh, the market's wrong on Metcalf and he's going to wind up wide receiver 13.
Yeah, he's a target for me. We have him wide receiver 19 in our rankings. He's at the top of his tier, though. So we're not way above market, even though we're 4 spots higher than ADP. I think the big question with Metcalf and a lot of these Steelers goes back to what's this team's pass volume going to look like? Is it going to look like an Arthur Smith offense? Is it going to look like an Aaron Rodgers offense? It's probably going to be somewhere in between, but exactly where that lands is going to be big. With Metcalf, the target share is going to be strong. If you look at the rest of this wide receiver core, he's going to be the clear top wide receiver here. I think he can get 24, 25% of this team's targets. And then I think he has exciting touchdown upside. DK Metcalf has a career 11.0% touchdown rate. He's a touchdown scorer. And Aaron Rodgers, 6.1% career touchdown rate. That's second highest among all active quarterbacks with at least 1,000 pass attempts. And even now that he's declining, he's still been at 4.8% touchdown rate the past 2 seasons. So I could see DK Metcalf scoring 8, 9, 10 touchdowns this season.
Yeah, the whole combo keeps me from being excited about DK Metcalf, but I absolutely think that we could look back by early October and been like, we all should have been drafting DK Metcalf a little bit higher among wide receivers. Big part of that, of course, you just talked about target share. It's dog food behind him at the position. I would bet that they'll add something before the beginning of the season, but it's not like saviors are out there on the open market. You can mention Keenan Allen, you can mention Amari Cooper. I think if either of those guys was ready to be a stud this coming season, then they would already have contracts. So I expect Pittsburgh to add somebody. They had Gabe Davis in for a visit, but I don't think that anybody that they add is actually going to threaten the upside for DK Metcalf, and it might be more of a signal that we do get more passing volume than we tend to expect from Arthur Smith.
The coaching staff has talked up Calvin Austin, calling him their number 2 wide receiver. I'm not buying that. I think he's stretched as a number 2. He might be even stretched as a number 3 wide receiver in the NFL. I think Roman Wilson is a guy they took fairly early last year. He did nothing as a rookie. Injuries were a big part of that. I'm curious to see if he makes any noise in August. But even in best ball, I'm not drafting any of those guys.
Yeah, I haven't heard any buzz on Roman Wilson. I know that there's a stray Steelers beat writer here and there who's like, Roman Wilson, this is going to be his year. But I haven't heard any actual buzz like, oh, he's looking good, the coaches are excited, anything like that. I was on Pat Freiermuth until the team was like, oh, we need a tight end. So not on Pat Freiermuth anymore. I still think he can score from a tight end 30 position, but that's not somebody we're even drafting in lineup setting leagues. Anybody else that you want to hit before we talk fades here?
No, but with Freiermuth, it is worth noting he's tight end 30 in ADP now. Like, that's super cheap. I believe Jonnu Smith will be the tight end 1 here. tackle. It's not a sure thing. I also think you're going to see a ton of 2 and 3 tight end sets from the Steelers because that's what Arthur Smith likes to do. So even if Freiermuth is the number 2 tight end, he's going to be on the field a decent amount. So as a best ball tight end 3 at that price, I do think Freiermuth is still in play.
Yeah, I for sure agree with that. On the fade side, I'm fading Jonnu Smith. I was fading him before. I'm fading him still, even down at tight end 19. Even with Arthur Smith, both in Tennessee and Atlanta, he was a part-time player. So, yeah, Arthur Smith likes him. Yeah, Jonnu Smith's going to get targets. He does not have last year's Dolphins season within his range of outcomes this year.
No, definitely not. It's interesting. Jonnu Smith's last 2 seasons with Arthur Smith, the usage was very identical. 62% route rates in both seasons. Like you said, Matt, he was a part-time player. 14.8% target share with the Titans in 2020, 13.2% with the 2023 Falcons. He did finish tight end 10 in points per game with the Titans in 2020, but that came on 8 touchdowns on just 41 catches. So it was a bloated touchdown rate. If you look at what Jonnu Smith did with the 2023 Falcons, 20th among tight ends in points per game, 23rd in expected points per game. That's more the level I think you're going to get out of him in Pittsburgh now.
Yeah, I agree with that. Caleb Johnson's the other guy that I'm fading here. RB23 is not a terrible ADP, but the reason I like Jaylen Warren at RB32 is because I think straight up in half PPR and PPR, I like him better, especially as we turn from best ball to lineup setting, than I do Caleb Johnson. I don't want to have 0 shares of Caleb Johnson just in case he does come out and lead this backfield right away. But I'm fading him at that price.
Yeah, I think the RB24 price tag is pretty. I think he's one of the more overvalued guys right now in fantasy drafts. I mean, to me, isn't Caleb Johnson's ceiling this year basically Najee Harris's role last year? And if that's the case, like Najee last year was 27th among RBs in half PPR points per game. He was 21st in expected half PPR points per game. So again, unless you're expecting Caleb Johnson to get more work than Najee did last year or be super efficient, I think the RB24 price tag is just wrong.
Yeah, I agree. See where Caleb Johnson, Jaylen Warren, and the rest of those Steelers sit in our rankings. See where the rest of the guys from this AFC North rank in your specific format. Because when you go to Draft Sharks, you'll not only see rankings for all of the main formats in fantasy football, you can sync your team that will import your scoring and lineup settings and give you rankings that are custom fit to your format in the draft tool that's going to help guide you all the way through your draft, no matter what kind of format you're playing. We'll give you updated pick recommendations at every single turn. Make sure that you know who you should be targeting when you're on the clock, so you don't have to think too much about all the factors that go into that. Whatever format you're playing, whenever you're drafting, we want Draft Sharks to be your unfair advantage.